Hidden face. The wind came down from the mountains like an ancient whisper, brushing the trees in the valley and the stone roof tiles of the old temple. Everything appeared still, but it was a living stillness, a stillness that listened. In the Eastern Wing's dojo, under a flickering oil lamp barely illuminating the tatame mats, the young monk Renji carefully cleaned the master's calligraphy brushes. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of bristles being rinsed in warm water. Renji was 24 years old, but his face looked either younger than his age or perhaps older. His dark eyes seemed to know something his voice had not yet learned to say. "Renji," the elderly master spoke from the shadows. "What do you see when you look into the mirror?" Renji paused. His mind reached for a proper answer, something wise, something learned. But he said nothing. The master slowly approached, walking with the pace of one who knows each step is already an answer. He sat across from Renji, watching him the way one watches a tree before it blooms. "You've served with devotion. You've studied the sutras. You rise before the others to meditate. Yet you still wear a face that isn't yours." Renji looked up, puzzled. The master continued, "Many walk through life as if they wear a mask sewn into their skin. A mask shaped by others' expectations, silent fears, misunderstood desires. That is the hidden face. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it's afraid to be seen." Outside, the wind nudged a branch. A few leaves fell slowly, as if they too were listening. "Master," Renji whispered, "how can I know which face is truly mine?" The old man closed his eyes for a moment, as if consulting a memory beyond time. "You cannot find it by seeking," he said at last, "but you can create the space where it may reveal itself." The words lingered in the air like incense smoke. In the days that followed, Renji said no more of it. Yet something in him began to shift. As he swept the temple gardens, chopped wood, or served tea to visitors, he began to feel a soft trembling within his chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anxiety. It was something else, like a gentle knock on the door of a long-forgotten house. One morning, while rinsing bowls by the river, he caught his reflection in the water. But he didn't recognize it. Not because the face had changed, but because he no longer knew who was behind those eyes. And then he remembered the master's words. "Many wear a mask sewn into the skin." That thought stopped him cold. What if all his discipline, his calm, his flawless behavior, was nothing more than an elegant way to hide? The river kept flowing, indifferent. That night, during meditation, Renji's face began to dissolve in his mind, not literally, but in a deeper sense. He could no longer hold a clear image of himself. He wasn't sure whether what others saw was his true self, or merely a shield. And so the true journey began, not forward, but inward, into that place where faces no longer lie, where there is nothing left to hide, where silence watches you like a mirror with no frame. This Zen story for meditation reveals how the face we present to the world may be a construction. Through this deep spiritual tale, we're invited to pause and to ask, who am I, really? If you've ever felt like you're living behind an invisible mask, this contemplative story can gently guide you toward your own inner truth. Some said he retreated into the forest to meditate. Others believed he went to visit an old friend in the mountains. But no one really knew, and no one seemed to mind. At the temple, uncertainty was just another form of teaching. That month, however, Hashin hadn't vanished. He remained in his quarters, writing with black ink on rice paper. No one knew what he was writing or for whom, but Renji had a feeling it had something to do with him. Lately, he had begun avoiding mirrors. Whenever he passed by the small garden pond, he would look away. It wasn't vanity. It was something quieter, more intimate, a discomfort that didn't speak aloud. It was as if the reflection was speaking to him in a language he hadn't yet learned. One morning, while gathering firewood in the forest, he crossed paths with an old man who wore no robes, but walked with the same calm as the monks. His eyes were small and sunlit, and his smile wasn't trying to please. "Are you from the temple?" the man asked. Renji nodded. "Then you must know what lies behind the face." Renji stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or bow. Before he could reply, the man continued, "Your face is what everyone sees, but behind it there's another, that one you won't see with open eyes. And yet, it's always with you. How do I find it?" Renji asked. "By stopping the search," the man replied, "and letting fall everything you're not." He turned and walked away, as if he had never been there at all. That night, Renji couldn't sleep. The old man's words echoed in his mind. Letting fall everything I'm not? But what if there's nothing left? What if my face is only made of what I've learned to show? He rose quietly and went to the dojo. No one else was awake. He sat in zazen before the faintly flickering lamp. He felt the weight of the silence, the weight of his body, the weight of his story. For the first time, he didn't try to be anything. Not a good student, not a wise young man, not a peaceful soul. He just sat, breathing, letting each mask loosen just a little. At dawn, he was summoned to Master Hashin's chamber. The old master handed him a single sheet of paper without saying a word. On it, just one sentence. "You can't hide what you're no longer carrying." Renji read it 3 times. He didn't fully understand it, but something in his chest began to soften. That day, as he raked the gravel garden, he didn't think about doing it well, or doing it poorly. He simply dragged the rake across the stones. And for a moment, he felt someone watching from within. Not with judgment, not with urgency, just presence. That presence had no face, but it was more real than anything he had ever known. Sometimes, spiritual awakening doesn't come with thunder or visions. It comes in the quiet gesture of no longer pretending. In that moment when you no longer know who you are, but also feel no need to find out. That's when true wisdom begins. Not with answers, but with space. This Zen story for reflection invites us to question who we think we are. With each scene, a window opens to the soul. Ideal for those seeking a guided meditation with narrative depth. A quiet journey inward to the true self, where silence is the only true teacher. The rain began without warning. First, it was a whisper across the leaves. Then a soft tapping on the stones of the inner courtyard. The whole temple filled with the wet scent of earth. There was no thunder, no lightning, just water, falling without judgment, as if it were washing more than just dust. Renji walked barefoot down the wooden corridor, unhurried. He had slept little, yet he wasn't tired. He had stopped asking who he was, and paradoxically, that had brought him rest. That morning, no tasks were assigned. It was a day of inner retreat. The monks were to spend 24 hours in silence. No speaking, no writing, no reading, no calligraphy, no tea ceremony. Only sitting, walking, breathing. Hashin called it entering the rooms of the self. Renji closed himself in his cell, shut his eyes, and breathed. Inside, everything felt stirred up. Not concrete thoughts, not clear emotions, just a kind of inner white noise, as if every mask he had worn for years was now peeling away one by one, leaving marks, cracks, and empty spaces behind. He remembered his childhood, the smile he learned to wear when his father got angry, the silence he clung to when fear crept in, politeness as a shield, duty as a refuge. One by one, these gestures, these faces surfaced, not as enemies, not as mistakes, but as pieces of a puzzle that had never truly belonged to him. "What if I was never what I thought I was?" he whispered inwardly. Silence answered. Hours later, he stepped into the rear garden, a quiet place few ever visited. There, a small statue of Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, stood covered in moss. Renji sat before her. The statue did not judge, did not ask for answers. It simply existed. And for the first time, Renji began to exist too. No roles, no duties, no face. He spent the afternoon beneath the gentle rain. He felt cold, but it didn't matter. Each drop was like an invisible finger, brushing against something long asleep within him. Then something shifted, not in the world, but in his perception. He no longer felt as though he were looking at the garden. He felt the garden was looking at him. And in that moment, a thought arose. Quiet, clear. What hides does not fear being seen. It fears not being understood. He wept, not as one who suffers, but as one who is set free. This fragment from a deep Zen story reminds us that the journey inward is a spiritual path without maps, but full of signs. Like Renji, we too can explore the hidden rooms of the self, where forgotten faces and gentle truths wait in silence. If you're searching for a story to awaken awareness, this reflection can be your quiet guide. One breath, one step, one moment closer to the root of your being. The rain stopped as night fell. The entire temple seemed to hold its breath. The oil lamps lit by the monks glowed like fallen stars resting on the tatami. No one spoke. Only footsteps spoke their own language. Renji walked to the dark wooden pavilion where the ancient scrolls were kept. He hadn't come to read. Something within had simply drawn him there. He opened the door slowly, and the scent of dry incense wrapped around him like an echo. He sat before a painting that hung on the wall, an ancient portrait with no face, only the silhouette of a monk. Nothing more. It was a deliberately unfinished work, meant to teach the unseen. Master Hashin had once said, "The true face cannot be painted, because it cannot be seen from the outside." Renji sat there for hours, contemplating that human-shaped emptiness. Slowly, he felt his own inner image begin to dissolve. He was no longer the dutiful student, no longer the obedient son, no longer the seeker. He was only presence. In the depth of the silence, he understood something, not a thought, not a feeling, a wordless certainty. Everything he had believed himself to be was the threshold, not the home. For days, Renji stopped speaking, though it wasn't a vow. No one asked him to. No one questioned him. The other monks began to sense that something was shifting within him. It wasn't withdrawal. It was transformation. During cleaning, his movements were simple, not rushed, not slow, precise like a falling leaf. On his walks, his eyes no longer searched for anything. In meditation, his body felt lighter, as though the idea of I had become transparent. One night he dreamed. He was in a room filled with thousands of mirrors. He walked among them, and in each reflection, he saw a different face. A child, a youth, an elder, a sage, a fearful man, an angry one, a joyful one, a false one, a pure one. They were all him, and none of them. Then the mirrors began to melt like mist. At the end of the corridor, only a small pond of clear water remained. He leaned over it, and for the first time, he saw nothing. He woke without surprise, and smiled, not with his lips but with his soul, because perhaps the true face is not one you can see, but one you can live. The next day, Hashin approached him with a cup of tea and sat quietly beside him. They exchanged no words. None were needed. Only after several minutes, the master whispered, "When you no longer identify with the face you see, You can begin to inhabit the one you are. And so, Renji began to live from the center, not as one who performs, but as one who simply is, without a mask, without effort, without a name. This Zen story about releasing the ego teaches us that true transformation begins the moment we stop trying to maintain an image. A tale of inner illumination. This narrative invites us to vanish, not in disappearance, but in truth. If you're looking for a spiritual bedtime story to guide you toward deep peace, this is your path. A journey into the silence of being, where authenticity no longer needs to hide. The leaves had begun to fall. Autumn descended into the valley with the softness of a truth that could no longer be avoided. Gold and crimson painted the temple paths, as if the earth itself were reminding us, nothing lasts forever. Renji spent hours in the stone garden, watching the shapes the wind drew on the freshly raked gravel. He no longer waited for teachings. He no longer needed to understand. But something inside him had not yet surrendered completely. A hidden corner, a shadowed place, a final resistance. That night he dreamed again. But this time there were no mirrors, no still ponds. Only a figure sitting across from him, identical to him. Same face, same posture, but wrapped in a dark mist. The figure stared at him in silence. Renji tried to speak, but no voice came. He tried to move closer, but the ground beneath his feet dissolved. He could only stand there, watching. The figure did nothing, just watched him, until, without moving its lips, it said inside his mind, "You created me." When he awoke, Renji knew what he had to do. He went to the oldest meditation chamber in the temple. It hadn't been used in years. The windows were sealed with opaque paper. An oil lamp flickered with a weak, trembling light. He sat in the center, closed his eyes, and descended. For hours, maybe days, he couldn't say. He did not move. He didn't run from his thoughts. He didn't reject them. He simply let them come. And they came. Old memories, unforgiven mistakes, shame, repressed desires, grudges, unhealed grief, all that he had buried in order to be worthy, to be spiritual, to be good. They appeared as figures, as voices, as physical sensations. But Renji did not turn away, and then he felt a presence rising from within. It wasn't foreign. It was the shadow, the hidden face, the one he had avoided his entire life, the self that was never accepted. The figure sat in front of him again, and this time Renji spoke. "I'm not here to deny you. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to know you." The shadow didn't respond, simply dissolved, not into smoke, but into light. And then something happened, something that cannot fully be described. Renji wasn't enlightened. He didn't float. He didn't see the universe. He simply felt whole. For the first time, when he stepped out of the chamber, the sun was rising. The monks looked at him, not because he did anything different, not because he said anything, but because something in him was at peace. And that peace needed no explanation. That night, in his notebook, he wrote only one sentence. "The face that hides is not an enemy. It is a seed. When you embrace it, it blooms." This Zen story to awaken the soul is like a soft whisper guiding us deep into the quietest parts of ourselves, where the unsaid lives, where the unseen hides, where love is still needed. This is not a story about overcoming, but about integrating. A wisdom to let go of control and make peace with who you are. If you've been searching for a story to find inner peace, you've come home. The days began to flow with a different softness. The temple remained the same. The gong rang at dawn, tasks were shared with equanimity, and the monks moved like calm waves. But something unseen had shifted within Renji. Not in how he acted, but in how he was. He no longer searched for answers in words, nor for enlightenment through deeds. He no longer feared being seen, nor felt the need to hide behind politeness or silence. One afternoon, while sweeping the stone path beside the ancient cherry tree, a young visitor approached him. She wore simple clothes, and her face carried a sadness without name. "Are you a teacher here?" she asked, lowering her voice. Renji looked at her with gentleness and shook his head softly. Then, "Why do you seem so at peace?" Renji was silent for a moment. Then he answered, "Because I no longer try to seem anything." The young woman looked at him for a long while, and her eyes began to fill with tears, not because of what he had said, but because of what he no longer needed to say. From that day on, some visitors began to seek him out, not for lectures or techniques or instructions, just to sit with him, in the garden, by the river, under the shade of the great tree. And in that shared stillness, something subtle would begin to happen. The mental noise started to dissolve, not because Renji was teaching, but because he embodied what so many had forgotten, the quiet permission to simply be. An old pilgrim who had visited hundreds of temples found Renji meditating one morning and sat beside him. After a while, he whispered, "Rarely have I seen a face so empty and so full at once." Renji smiled. "What you see is not a face," he said softly. "It's the absence of one." Master Hashin, who had been observing from afar for weeks, came to sit with him one night under the starry sky. They sat in silence on the wooden terrace, lit only by the moon. "Renji," the elder said, "what do you see now when you look in the mirror?" Renji paused for a moment. "Nothing. And doesn't that frighten you?" "No, because that nothing isn't emptiness. It's space. It's peace. It's what I am. When I stop trying to be anything." The master closed his eyes, a deep satisfaction on his face. After a long silence, he murmured, "Then you have understood. This Zen story is more than just a reflection. It's a living experience. Woven with the subtle threads of Eastern wisdom, it offers a healing spiritual journey through simplicity and presence. Ideal for those seeking meditative storytelling, it gently reminds us, only when we stop trying to be, can we truly return to what we are. If you've ever asked how to find your true self, maybe the answer isn't in searching, but in letting go of everything that hides its light. Winter had arrived. The fields surrounding the temple were covered in frost. The air grew heavier. The sound of branches crunching underfoot became a sacred kind of music. Everything slowed down, became more contained. But within that slower rhythm, a different truth emerged. The beauty of the essential. Renji woke up before the gong, not out of duty, but because his body longed for silence. He would step out into the courtyard and sit on the damp stone beside the pond. He watched the mist of his breath disappear with each exhale. It was a meditation with no name, no shape, no method. Just being, just letting it pass. Some monks, seeing him there, began to join him. Others copied him, not knowing why. But no one asked for instructions, because Renji didn't offer techniques. He offered presence. One morning, a young novice approached him, visibly distressed. "I don't know who I am," he confessed, his eyes trembling on the edge of anguish. Renji looked at him with tenderness, as if seeing a younger reflection of himself. "That's okay," he replied gently. "I don't know who I am either." The novice looked puzzled. Renji continued, "Knowing who you are is less important than stopping the act of being who you're not. When you stop carrying the false, the truth doesn't need to arrive. It's already there." The young monk began to cry, not from pain but from relief, and in that moment, without realizing it, he too began to awaken. Weeks passed. Visitors returned to the temple searching for something they couldn't quite name. It wasn't wisdom. It wasn't technique. It was a feeling of home, of inner rest, of permission to exist without striving. One afternoon, as Renji was arranging flowers on the altar, a child approached him and asked with innocent curiosity, "Are you really you?" Renji looked at him and smiled. "Not always, but when I am, everything is at peace." That phrase began to travel from one mouth to another, like an ownerless koan. Some wrote it in their journals. Others repeated it silently while meditating. Some simply remembered it when they were afraid. When I am me, everything is at peace. Master Hashin, in one of his rare talks, spoke to the monks gathered in the main hall. "On this path," he said, "we're not here to build identities, but to dissolve them, not to know more, but to be less, until all that remains is what needs no name, no face, no story." He paused and pointed toward the garden, where Renji, unaware, was playing with the same child who had once asked him the question. The one who has stopped hiding has nothing to teach, and that's why he teaches with every step. This long Zen tale for healing offers not a solution, but a dissolution of ego, of fear, of the need to be someone. In its quiet simplicity, it opens the door to profound inner transformation. If you're looking for a spiritual narrative to help you let go of ego, with a calm, meditative voice to accompany your practice, this story is for you. Because sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is simply to be. The temple followed its course. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. That year, the plum trees bloomed early, as if they knew there was no need to wait. Birds came down to eat from the ground without fear. Even the cats, once wary of the zendo, now napped near the meditation cushions. Renji had not abandoned his tasks. He still chopped wood, swept the paths, served tea. But he moved with such a present absence that anyone watching him would understand, without words, that he wasn't there to play a role. He was there, simply being. One night, as he walked the gravel path toward the bamboo hall, he felt a presence beside him. Not someone, something, an ancient stillness, a silent recognition. And for the first time, he understood what Hashin had tried to tell him years before. You can't hide what you're no longer carrying. Renji no longer carried anything. Not pride, not shame, not the desire to be more, not the need to be less. And then something curious happened. An old visitor, who had been silently observing him for days, approached with reverence. "Are you enlightened?" the elder asked. Renji looked at him with compassion and shook his head. "I just stopped dressing up as myself," he said. The elder laughed, but it was a laugh of relief, the laugh of someone who, perhaps, no longer needed to keep searching. Days passed. Master Hashin died in silence. On a moonless morning, he left no instructions, no ceremonies, no final teachings, only a single phrase, written in his familiar hand, placed gently on his pillow. When the face falls away, silence speaks. Renji read the note and closed his eyes. A warm tear traced down his cheek. But it wasn't sadness. It was gratitude, because he understood, because he no longer needed to. A month later, as the season changed, the elder monks offered Renji the role of abbot. He bowed respectfully but declined. He simply said, "This temple doesn't need a new face. It needs to see its own." And with a quiet smile, he left. He didn't run. He didn't disappear. He simply walked, back to the mountains where he was born, back to the river where, as a boy, he learned to listen to silence. They say some still see him along stone paths, sitting under a tree, or helping lift a beam in some distant temple. But when asked who he is, he only replies, "I'm no one, But I'm here. And so, the face that once hid stopped hiding. Not because it was shown, but because it was no longer needed. This Zen bedtime story is a soft hymn to the formless truth. Ideal for evening meditation or moments of quiet reflection, it offers deep rest for the soul tired of trying to fit in. A transformative spiritual tale that invites you to release the image, the hurry, the burden. Because when there's no one left to protect, the real begins to appear. If you've been seeking a story to reconnect with your essence, one that speaks to the heart rather than the mind, this is it. You're already here,